Tempest in Teyvat, Rimuru's Elemental Odyssey by KabirSingh808. Relentless resolve, the power of the Adepti unleashed. As Rimuru, Ether, and Paimon left the Golden House, they were immediately met with the fierce howl of a storm that had engulfed all of Liu. The skies were darkened, with bolts of lightning piercing through ominous clouds, and waves crashed ferociously against the coast. Rimuru's senses heightened, feeling a dreadfully powerful presence lurking within the maelstrom. Ciel's voice echoed in his mind, urgently warning him, "Master, the ancient god Ojal has awakened." Rimuru's eyes narrowed, and he immediately unfurled his wings, reaching out to Ether. "We need to reach the Jade Chamber quickly," he instructed, holding his hand out. Ether clasped his hand firmly, and with a quick nod, Rimuru launched them both into the stormy skies, Paimon in tow. They flew swiftly over the churning ocean, which seemed alive with a primal fury. As they neared the Jade Chamber, they saw massive storms gathering around the Gaian stone forest, the waves swirling violently. But more ominously, a massive, five-headed sea serpent rose from the depths. Each head was formidable, with four piercing eyes and fins lining its sides, twisting and undulating with dark energy. Rimuru's eyes widened. As the battle already underway, he muttered, noting that the Jade Chamber hovered near the storm, anchored by Ningguang's command. Ciel's voice cut through his thoughts. "Ojal's power is immense, but he's not as strong as some of the monsters from our world, such as Charybdis." Rimuru nodded in agreement. Even so, he knew the battle ahead would not be easy. They landed on the Jade Chamber's deck to find Ningguang, Keqing, and Ganyu already waiting for them, along with several of the Adepti. Ningguang's expression was one of worry and determination as she turned to Rimuru. "Where were you?" she demanded. "Had to deal with the Fatui back at the Golden House," Rimuru replied. Keqing crossed her arms, a mixture of doubt and relief flashing across her face. "For a moment, I thought you had run away," she said, but Rimuru simply chuckled. "Why would I run? I've already fought creatures much more powerful than Ojal." He looked at her confidently. "Trust me, I'm not going anywhere." Keqing raised an eyebrow, slightly impressed, while Ningguang nodded approvingly. Rimuru then turned his attention to Ether, his expression softening with concern. "Are you sure you're okay after that hit from Chill? He landed a pretty heavy blow." Ether nodded firmly. "Don't worry about me, Rimuru. I can handle this." Rimuru's gaze held a moment longer, worried, before he nodded in satisfaction. Then, as they looked at Ojal's massive form, which twisted and crashed in the water below, Paimon's eyes went wide with fear. "So, how are we supposed to defeat that?" she asked, looking around at the group. Ningguang replied, "We have some advanced weapons, designed by Cloud Retainer. We'll use these Guizhong ballista to strike Ojal with powerful blasts of adeptal energy." She gestured, and magical platforms began to form, stretching out above the Jade Chamber to give them stable ground to fight from. The Adepti moved into position at the Guizhong ballista, channeling their adeptal power into the weapons, and each ballista thrummed with energy. Moon Carver, Cloud Retainer, and Mountain Shaper took their positions, focusing their power. The first barrage of energy-infused arrows launched from the ballistae, illuminating the darkened sky as they streaked toward Ojal's massive, writhing form. Each blast struck with a resounding impact, shaking the air. Ojal roared, each head recoiling momentarily from the strikes. The hits barely fazed him, but it was enough to show the creature was not invulnerable. Rimuru analyzed the battle closely. Though the ballistae were managing to cause some damage, he knew they would need to keep Ojal distracted to make any headway. He positioned himself alongside Ether and Keqing. Ciel's voice echoed in his mind, "This creature is fierce, but if we can keep it off balance, we might have a chance to weaken it further for the Adepti's attacks to land critical damage." As Ether, Paimon, Keqing, and Rimuru steadied themselves on the platform, a series of dark, swirling portals suddenly opened around them. Fatui soldiers began pouring out, their eyes fixed on the newly built Guizhong ballista, clearly aiming to sabotage Liu's only line of defense against Ojal. Without missing a beat, Rimuru moved swiftly, intercepting the first Fatui soldier with a precise punch that shattered the mask right off the soldier's face. The force sent the soldier flying back into one of the portals, knocking over others that had started to emerge. Seizing the opportunity, Rimuru unsheathed his katana, his gaze steely and focused. With a swift motion, Rimuru conjured 4 clones of himself, each a perfect replica ready for battle. He glanced at Ether and Ketching, who were already preparing to engage the oncoming wave of enemies. "I'll cover the ballista," Rimuru said, his voice carrying a fierce determination. "I'll send my clones to assist you both. Let's make sure they don't lay a hand on this weapon." The clones split off, moving with blinding speed toward Ether and Ketching's positions. Each clone wielded a blade, darting between Fatui soldiers, intercepting their attacks and deflecting their blows. Ether swung his sword, slicing through a pyro agent attempting to set fire to one of the ballista's mechanisms, while one of Rimuru's clones launched a kick that sent a cryo-Sisson mage tumbling backward. In the center of the platform, Rimuru kept his focus trained on Ojul's massive form thrashing in the ocean below, but he also kept his katana ready for any Fatui soldiers who tried to break through. One by one, he intercepted them, his blade flashing with precision as he blocked their strikes and swiftly countered, forcing the intruders back through the portals. Ketching fought alongside one of Rimuru's clones, her electro-infused blade crackling with energy as she parried a barrage of Fatui attacks. With a quick nod, the clone mirrored her movements, coordinating each strike to drive back the soldiers. Ketching cast a sidelong glance at the clone, impressed by its combat skill. In another corner of the platform, Ether was surrounded by a group of Fatui skirmishers attempting to overwhelm him with sheer numbers. Rimuru's clone leapt to his side, slicing through the soldiers with ease, giving Ether the opening he needed to unleash a powerful Anemo burst, sending a wave of energy that scattered their attackers. Meanwhile, Rimuru was dodging attacks from several Fatui soldiers who had tried to flank him. Moving with practiced agility, he blocked a strike from a mirror maiden, her water-based attack clashing against his katana. He quickly countered with a swift, upward slash that forced her back, then spun to deflect an incoming pyro agent's dagger. A swift elbow to the agent's chest disoriented him, and with a final punch, Rimuru sent him careening back into the portal. As the waves of Fatui soldiers kept coming, Rimuru's focus shifted back to Ojul. His massive heads twisted in fury, and the creature released a powerful roar that shook the platform, sending shockwaves through the air. Rimuru steadied himself, realizing Ojul was attempting to disorient them. But the Adepti, still channeling their energy through the Guizhong ballista, remained focused, keeping Ojul at bay. Ciel's voice sounded in his mind, "Ojul is testing our defenses, likely searching for an opening to strike directly at Liu. If we're going to hold him off, the ballista must keep firing uninterrupted." Rimuru turned his focus back to Ojul, his gaze narrowing as he assessed the creature's ominous shift in stance. The ancient sea serpent, now fully awakened and enraged, lifted its heads toward the sky, dark energy swirling in ominous waves around it. In an instant, Ojul condensed the energy into a massive sphere, which pulsed with an intense malevolence before fragmenting into countless smaller orbs. These projectiles floated briefly, suspended in the air, then came crashing down like a storm of meteors toward the Jade Chamber's platform. The ground trembled under the assault as energy rained down, sending tremors through the structure. Ningguang, Ketching, Ether, and even the Fatui soldiers scrambled to shield themselves as the onslaught intensified, the platform quaking under the impact of each blast. Rimuru was a blur, darting across the battlefield with swift, precise movements, deflecting the falling energy spheres. His eyes scanned the chaos, noting each alley's position while maneuvering through the blasts. Amid the frenzy, his gaze settled on an electro-Sisson mage teetering dangerously close to the edge. The platform buckled suddenly, and with a startled cry, the mage lost her balance, slipping off the edge and beginning to plummet toward the stormy sea below. Rimuru didn't hesitate. He unfurled his wings in a powerful motion, diving after her with incredible speed. The wind rushed past him as he descended, stretching his arms out to reach her in time. Within moments, he caught her in a swift, secure grip, holding her in a protective, princess carry as he soared back upward, dodging falling projectiles and flying debris. As they ascended, Rimuru's wings beat with force, carrying them both back to the platform amid the chaos. He landed smoothly, setting her down near one of the portals from which her comrades continued to emerge. She looked up at him, wide-eyed and visibly shaken, clutching her broken catalyst in trembling hands. Rimuru met her gaze with a steady, reassuring calm, his expression firm yet compassionate. "You're safe now," he said, his voice carrying an unexpected warmth. though his eyes remained focused and resolute. With a swift motion, he slashed his katana through her catalyst, rendering it completely unusable. The mage gasped, her cheeks flushing with a surprised softness as she clasped her hands to her face, visibly flustered by his unexpected kindness. Too embarrassed to respond, she darted back through the portal, cheeks still flushed, her mind reeling from the encounter. Rimuru, unaware of her reaction, turned immediately back to the fray. His attention snapped to the remaining Fatui soldiers, who had redoubled their assault on the Guizhong ballista in a frantic effort to disable them. As the platform shook with Ozhel's continued assault, Rimuru dashed forward with renewed determination. His wings beat with controlled intensity, creating gusts that sent enemy soldiers staggering. He moved through the battlefield with precise, fluid movements, slicing through soldiers in rapid succession, his katana flashing with each strike. The sky above crackled ominously as Ozhel loomed, each head bristling with a primal wrath as it prepared for yet another devastating attack. Ozhel's anger boiled over, his colossal five-headed form thrashing as he unleashed a furious roar that echoed through the battlefield. Even after his first devastating attack, the Jade Chamber's platform remained standing, battered but unyielding. Adeptal arrows continued to rain down on Ozhel from the ballistae, each impact leaving ripples in his watery form. The onslaught from the Adepti stoked his rage further, pushing him to channel an overwhelming amount of energy once again. This time, Ozhel focused all his power on a single devastating blow aimed directly at the Jade Chamber platform. Rimuru and Ether quickly sensed the impending danger, a dark energy pooling in the center of each of Ozhel's 5 heads. With swift determination, Rimuru slammed his hand down on the platform, summoning an enormous wall of geo-energy to shield their position. Beside him, Ether's gaze sharpened, and he called forth a massive anemo shield, swirling with intense wind currents, protecting the group from all sides. As the energy within Ozhel continued to swell, Ciel's voice echoed in Rimuru's mind, analyzing the situation. She explained that Ether's shield was stronger than expected because the Adepti had infused their energy within him, bolstering his power. Rimuru quickly absorbed this information, nodding in gratitude and respect for his friend's newfound strength. It would be needed against a threat as ancient and powerful as Ozhel. Suddenly, the massive beam from Ozhel shot forward, tearing through the sky like a dark, flaming comet. It slammed into Rimuru's geo-wall, causing an eruption of dust and debris as cracks snaked across the barrier's surface almost instantly. Rimuru felt the pressure of the attack as tremors spread through the platform beneath them. Understanding that his first defense wouldn't hold, Rimuru immediately summoned a second, thicker wall of geo-energy, layering it behind Ether's anemo shield to provide extra support. Ozhel, sensing resistance, poured even more energy into his beam, intensifying it as it crashed against the barriers. The sheer force of his assault caused the platform to tremble violently, nearly knocking some of the Adepti off balance. The dark, fiery beam bore down on Ether's anemo shield, and despite its strength, cracks began to appear on its surface. The shield groaned under the relentless power of Ozhel's wrath, the pressure threatening to shatter it at any moment. Rimuru, realizing the peril, called back his clones, who appeared beside him in identical, focused postures. Each one sat in meditation, channeling their collective elemental energy directly into Rimuru. As the power surged through him, Rimuru funneled it all into his shield, strengthening and reinforcing the geo-wall with layer upon layer of solidified energy. His eyes glowed with determination, his senses sharpened as he pushed his limits. Finally, Ozhel's relentless beam punched through Ether's anemo shield, dissolving it with a crackling surge of energy. The beam met Rimuru's second geo-shield, sending tremors through the entire structure as Rimuru poured every ounce of strength into maintaining its integrity. For a brief, intense moment, the two forces clashed, a stalemate of raw power and unyielding defense. Just as it seemed the shield would give way, the elemental energy from Rimuru's clone surged within him, fortifying the wall with an impenetrable resolve. The platform shook under the force, and a massive explosion erupted as Ozhel's beam finally exhausted itself against the barrier, filling the air with smoke and bright shards of dissipating energy. When the dust and smoke began to settle, the sight that greeted everyone was one of awe and triumph. Rimuru's geo-shield stood tall, scarred but unbroken, having fully absorbed the devastating attack. Ozhel's furious expression flickered as the realization of his failure dawned on him. Rimuru exhaled heavily, his wings slightly unfurling as he steadied himself. The faint glow from his geo shield began to dim as he relaxed his hold, and he glanced at Ether, who was already standing ready, nodding in silent understanding. They had managed to protect everyone on the platform from Ojul's wrath, a feat that would resonate with the people of Liu for ages. As Rimuru and Ether turned their attention back to Ojul, they immediately noticed that the ancient god's anger had reached terrifying heights. All 5 of his colossal, serpentine heads fixated on them, his glowing eyes narrowing in fierce determination. Recognizing the duo as his primary obstacle in destroying the Jade Chamber's platform, Ojul let out a rumbling roar that reverberated through the sea and air alike, sending a wave of dread across the battlefield. In a flash, 2 of his heads lunged forward, each one launching massive beams of concentrated energy straight at Rimuru and Ether. With the beams hurtling towards them, Ether and Rimuru reacted instinctively, splitting off in opposite directions. Ether maneuvered with quick, agile movements, evading the relentless beams that scorched the air just inches from his skin. Rimuru darted with calculated precision, his wings creating gusts that deflected some of the energy around him, the beams slicing through the space he had only moments before occupied. But Ojul wasn't done yet. As his 2 heads continued their barrage, his remaining heads sank beneath the churning ocean, disappearing from sight. The Adepti, Ningguang, Keqing, and the others on the Jade Chamber's platform watched with growing unease, each bracing themselves against the waves crashing harder against the platform's foundation. The sudden disappearance of 2 of Ojul's heads into the water only heightened the tension, their intent unclear as the god loomed ominously over the battlefield. A tense silence fell, each person on the platform sensing something sinister building in the depths below. And then, in a split second, one of Ojul's submerged heads erupted from the ocean directly in front of Rimuru, catching him off guard. Before Rimuru could react fully, Ojul's head lunged back and unleashed a massive energy beam point blank. The dark, seething energy collided with Rimuru with a devastating force, a blinding flash of light bursting upon impact. The shockwaves sent Rimuru rocketing backward across the sky, his figure hurtling uncontrollably towards the mountainous landscape behind Liu Harbor. The force of the impact shook the earth as he crashed into the mountainside with a thunderous explosion, the blast sending rocks and debris scattering across the city below. A towering plume of smoke and dust erupted from the point of collision, obscuring any view of him. Paimon's small frame trembled as she floated, eyes wide in shock, one hand covering her mouth as she gasped. Rimuru, she cried, her voice filled with panic and disbelief. As the dust and smoke cleared, all eyes were fixed on the massive crater in the mountainside where Rimuru had been struck. The sheer impact of Ojul's attack had left a gaping wound in the landscape, sending shards of rock tumbling down and creating an echo of tension that held everyone on edge. But Ojul's cold, calculating gaze remained on the spot, as though waiting for any sign of life or movement. Taking advantage of the distraction, Ojul's second head emerged from the sea without warning, slipping through the water's surface in near silence. Its massive eyes fixed on Ether with chilling precision as it prepared a devastating energy blast. Ether, sensing the imminent danger, tried to move but was still recovering from the intense dodging earlier. Just as the ancient god's attack charged to full power, a blur shot across the battlefield in a flash, grabbing Ether and Paimon just as Ojul's energy beam unleashed. The energy crashed into the mountain with another explosion that rippled through the skies of Liu, but Ether and Paimon found themselves safe, nestled against the broad chest and steady wings of none other than Rimuru. As Rimuru landed gently on the platform below, everyone's expressions shifted from shock to utter disbelief. Ether and Paimon looked up at him, wide-eyed and stunned, with a mixture of awe and relief on their faces. Rimuru. But, how? Ether's voice was breathless as he spoke, unable to hide his amazement. It was as if they had just seen a miracle. Rimuru chuckled, setting them down carefully as his wings folded back. "Are you both okay?" he asked, concern and a touch of humor lighting up his eyes. Ether blinked, still processing everything, then nodded. "I think I'm fine, but shouldn't I be the one asking you that?" he replied, smiling despite his confusion. Paimon, meanwhile, was still looking at Rimuru as if she was seeing a ghost. But, how? We saw you get hit by that huge attack. How did you survive?" Her voice was a mix of wonder and shock, her white eyes darting between Rimuru and the smoldering mountain behind them. Rimuru's eyes twinkled as he offered a grin. "Well, it's simple," he began, with a casual shrug. Just before Ozhel's attack hit, I transferred my consciousness to one of my other clones. What he struck was just a substitute I put in my place. Ether and Paimon exchanged astonished glances. The resourcefulness of his move and his calmness after facing Ozhel's full fury left them speechless. Paimon seemed to take a moment longer to absorb the situation, her face showing awe and confusion all at once. You just switched places. Paimon's voice was barely a whisper, clearly still reeling. Even though you have done this before, but seriously, how many other tricks do you have up your sleeve? Rimuru chuckled. Enough to keep things interesting, he replied smoothly, then turned his gaze back toward Ozhel, whose many eyes now glowered with even deeper malice, sensing his failed attempt to eliminate one of his biggest threats. Ether, catching his breath, looked back at the ancient god, Ozhel. It's like, he's getting angrier, Ether murmured, watching as the ancient god's heads whipped back and forth in increasing agitation. Rimuru's expression turned serious as he observed Ozhel's mounting fury. It seems he's finally started seeing us as a real threat, he muttered. We're far from finished here. As Rimuru and the others turned their gaze back to Ozhel, his form now radiating pure fury, Rimuru's mind raced. The battle had escalated quickly, and the ancient god's relentless power was bearing down on them. His attention still partially focused on Ozhel's movements, Rimuru finally turned to Seal, his mind filled with questions. Seal, Rimuru asked, his voice barely a whisper as he sought her guidance, is there any way we can defeat this ancient god? Ciel's voice, calm yet urgent, filled his mind as the battle raged around them. Yes, Master, there is a way, but it will take time. She hesitated for a moment before continuing, the weight of the situation pressing upon them both. I'm trying to unseal one of your basic abilities. Rimuru blinked in surprise, his heart skipping a beat. Unseal? What do you mean? He felt a sudden surge of curiosity mixed with concern. He knew that Seal had always been working on ways to bypass the seal that restricted his powers, but unsealing one of his abilities seemed like an unprecedented approach, something he had never expected. Ciel's response came in a steady and focused tone. From the moment we entered this world, I've been analyzing everything around us, including the seal that binds your abilities. I've been trying to find a way to unlock your powers without breaking the seal completely. Shattering it entirely would cause more harm than good. Rimuru's eyes widened. But if the seal is what stops me from using my full powers, how do you plan on unsealing them? Ciel's answer came with a slight pause, as though she were carefully considering the best way to explain. I found that trying to break the seal all at once was too risky. So, I developed a new strategy, extracting your abilities a little at a time. The more powerful the ability, the harder it is to unseal it, but we're making progress. I started gathering energy from the surrounding environment, using the clones you created to absorb it. It's slow, but it's working. Rimuru was taken aback, absorbing the information. So, all this time, my clones have been helping gather energy for this. His mind raced as he processed the implications. Yes, Seal confirmed, her voice carrying a sense of purpose. And while I initially thought it would take at least a month to unlock just one ability, things changed when Ozhel's beam hit your clone. I used that clone to absorb as much energy as possible. Now, we have enough to unseal one of your core abilities, enough to take him down. Rimuru nodded, taking in Ciel's words, though a question lingered in his mind. What ability are you talking about? What are we unsealing? Ciel's voice answered him again, but this time, it was hidden in his mind, soft and direct. The ability you obtained in the central world, the one that was with you from the moment you reincarnated. Rimuru's heart skipped a beat as he realized the gravity of what Ciel was suggesting. His core ability from the central world. The very power that had been with him through every world he'd visited. It was something he had never fully accessed, a part of him that had remained dormant. Now, it seemed the only chance to overcome Ozhel. However, a lingering question gnawed at him. He glanced once more at Ozhel, his form a tempest of rage and power, as he prepared for his next attack. Rimuru wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, the pressure of the moment starting to settle in. He turned to Ciel, his voice filled with concern. Ciel, he thought urgently. Are you sure unlocking this ability won't have any adverse effects on me or my stomach? For a brief moment, there was a silence. Rimuru's mind processing things faster as he awaited Ciel's response. He had to be sure. There could be no mistakes here. But then, Ciel's reassuring voice filled his mind once more, calm and certain. It will not harm you, Master. I've carefully monitored the process. The ability is linked to you, but it will not affect your core stability or cause any negative consequences. Trust me. Rimuru breathed a sigh of relief. He had to trust Ciel, she had never steered him wrong before. With a firm nod to himself, Rimuru refocused on the battle. The time had come to use everything he had. He looked back at Ojal, his mind now clear. We need to end this, Rimuru muttered to himself, his voice steady with resolve. Ether, Paimon, hold on. We're going to finish this fight. As the battle continued to rage on and Ojal's massive form loomed over the platform, Rimuru's expression hardened. The weight of the situation had become apparent to him. There were few options left, and it was clear that a direct confrontation with the ancient god was not enough. His allies were doing their best to keep Ojal distracted, but the situation was growing dire, and there was only one course of action Rimuru could see that might end this conflict. The Adepti were gathering their energy, preparing for the next onslaught, and Rimuru's mind raced as he thought through his options. He knew that this would sound strange, but he had no time for hesitation. With determination burning in his eyes, Rimuru addressed the gathered Adepti, his tone serious but filled with resolve. I need to ask you all something, he began, his voice steady but urgent. He turned to face each of them in turn, sensing the weight of the moment. Do you mind if I eat him? The question was met with stunned silence. The Adepti froze, unsure of how to react to such an unexpected request. Moon Carver's eyes widened in disbelief as he looked to Rimuru. What do you mean by that? He asked, his voice laced with both surprise and confusion. It was clear he hadn't expected Rimuru to make such an outlandish proposal. Cloud Retainer, ever the composed one, cocked her head slightly, trying to process the implications of Rimuru's words. Are you suggesting that you can defeat Ojal by eating him? She asked, her tone cautious yet still filled with curiosity. She was well versed in the powers of gods, and the idea that one could simply consume such a being was beyond her understanding, but she did not dismiss it outright. After all, Rimuru had displayed abilities that defied logic before. The other Adepti exchanged wary glances, unsure how to respond. The traveler, Ether, had a similarly confused expression, and Paimon, hovering beside him, was completely bewildered. Wait, Rimuru, what do you mean, eat him? How is that even possible? Paimon exclaimed, her small arms flailing in the air as she struggled to grasp the meaning of Rimuru's words. Rimuru's eyes were calm, despite the gravity of the situation. He had already considered this carefully, and he was certain this was the only way to end the battle. There's only one way I can think of to defeat him, he said, his voice steady. I can eat him. The words seemed almost absurd in the context of the battle, but Rimuru was resolute. It's the only way to put an end to this madness. If I can consume Ojal, it'll break his hold over the platform and stop him from destroying everything. Ketching, always sharp and quick to analyze the situation, furrowed her brow in confusion and skepticism. But how could you possibly eat him? She asked, incredulous. You're talking about an ancient god, Rimuru. What makes you think you can just eat him? Rimuru met her gaze, his expression never wavering. Just trust me. I can do it. I just need you all to keep him distracted. That's all I need. Keep him busy for me, and I'll do the rest. The Adepti, though still hesitant, shared a brief glance with one another. They had seen Rimuru's power firsthand, and while they were unsure of how he intended to carry out such a plan, they knew they had no other option. They had to trust him if they were to have any hope of defeating Ojal. Mountain Shaper was the first to speak up, his voice resolute. Do whatever it takes, he said, his tone thick with acceptance. We will continue to keep Ojal busy. But you'd better make sure this works. The stakes are too high. Cloud Retainer nodded, her wings flicking with determination. If there is a chance, we must take it, she agreed, though there was a note of caution in her words. We will support you. But make it count. Rimuru nodded in return, feeling the weight of their trust settle on him. Thank you, he said softly. I won't let you down. With that, Rimuru's wings flared out, and he shot into the sky. The Adepti, fully committed to the plan, loosed another volley of powerful arrows toward Ojal. The barrage of energy projectiles struck the ancient god, causing him to stagger momentarily as the force of the attack disrupted his concentration. Ojal, now fully enraged by the battle, noticed Rimuru's departure and immediately prepared to fire a devastating energy beam to strike him down. His 5 heads roared in unison, and 2 of them aimed at Rimuru as he flew away, charging their beams. But before Ojal could fire, a flurry of adeptal arrows pierced through the air, striking the ancient god and momentarily disrupting his focus. The beams he had been preparing blasted off course, exploding in front of his face in a brilliant flash of energy. The smoke billowed, momentarily obscuring the battlefield. Ojal roared in fury as he regained his focus, now aware that Rimuru had vanished from his sights. The ancient god shifted his attention back to the adepti, who had continued their barrage of energy arrows, forcing him to turn his focus to Ether and the others. As Rimuru flew farther away, the space between him and Ojal grew. But Rimuru wasn't merely running away. He was setting the stage. He had given the adepti the opportunity to create a diversion, and now, it was up to him to make his move. As Rimuru reached a safe distance, he felt the weight of the battle shift. His gaze fixed ahead, narrowing as he turned to Seal. "Is it ready?" he asked, his voice steady with purpose. "Yes, it is," Seal responded, her tone reflecting confidence in the plan they had set in motion. A sly grin crept across Rimuru's face, a mix of determination and a little excitement. He had carefully prepared for this moment, and now, the time to act had finally come. He flapped his wings and soared higher, flying toward Ojal from behind, determined to catch the ancient god off guard. Every movement was deliberate, each second bringing him closer to the apex of their battle. Meanwhile, Ojal had completed the final stages of his energy gathering. All 5 of his heads coiled together, pooling their immense power to destroy the Jade Chamber once and for all. He could feel the massive surge of energy swelling within him. The task was almost complete soon, the city would be obliterated, the platform shattered beyond repair. What Ojal didn't notice was the presence of Rimuru closing in from behind, rapidly closing the distance. Just as Ojal was about to unleash the devastating blast, one of his heads turned, catching a glimmer of movement. He shifted his gaze and saw Rimuru, flying swiftly toward him. The ancient god's eyes flashed with irritation, his attention drawn away from his energy gathering. But before Ojal could react or even think to defend himself, Rimuru's plan unfurled in a way no one could have anticipated. In an instant, Rimuru's form began to shift. His body turned into a slimy substance, slick and flowing like an uncontrollable mass. It began to expand at an astonishing rate, rapidly growing larger with each passing moment. It was a transformation so massive that it caught everyone's attention. Both the adepti and the citizens of Liu were stunned as they saw the form of a giant, slimy structure rising behind Ojal, looming like a monstrous shadow. The slime continued to grow, even surpassing the size of Ojal himself, becoming a massive entity that dwarfed the ancient god. The very air seemed to thicken with tension as the sight of the expanding slime took over the battlefield. The sheer scale of the transformation was enough to make even the most seasoned warriors pause in awe. Ojal, now fully aware of the massive presence behind him, twisted his many heads in fury. His eyes narrowed in disbelief at the sight of Rimuru's vast, growing form. With a growl of frustration, Ojal fired the energy he had been gathering directly at the approaching slime, aiming to obliterate it before it could reach him. The blast surged toward Rimuru's massive slimy body, but it was already too late. The beam tore through the surface of the slime but had no lasting impact. The energy dissipated as the slime regenerated almost immediately, restoring its form and power with ease. The beam had been ineffective, unable to penetrate the regenerative mass. It was a futile effort on Ojal's part, and Rimuru's slime continued to grow, wrapping around the ancient god with incredible speed. Ojal fired again, unleashing a second beam with all the force he could muster, but it was the same result. His attack did nothing. Rimuru's form absorbed the attack as though it were a mere nuisance, his body expanding further as the ancient god's resistance only made him more vulnerable. In a few seconds, Ojal's form was fully engulfed by the vast slime, his body completely swallowed by Rimuru's overwhelming size. The once mighty ancient god struggled against the ever-growing mass of slime, but his attempts to break free were futile. The slime had not only consumed him but was now compressing, slowly condensing and forcing Ojal into a smaller and smaller space. Rimuru's form contracted, shrinking in on itself as the powerful energy within him was steadily absorbed and contained. The ancient god's massive, terrifying body was reduced to nothing, swallowed entirely by Rimuru, whose slime-like form continued to compress until it was once again the size of a typical human. The mass of slime returned to Rimuru's familiar, humanoid shape, and he stood tall, his wings flapping gently as he surveyed the battlefield. There was no sign of Ojal now, only the victory that Rimuru had claimed through his sheer audacity and power. The adepti and the citizens of Liu, still reeling from the intensity of the battle, looked at Rimuru with a mix of disbelief, awe, and growing respect. He had done it. The ancient god had been defeated in a manner no one could have predicted. The battle was over. Is it over? Ether asked, his voice shaky with disbelief, staring at the place where Ojal had once stood. He could hardly believe that the ancient god was no more. Rimuru took a deep breath, looking around at the now silent battlefield. His gaze met Ether's, and with a casual shrug, he said, "Yeah. It's over. That's one way to deal with a giant god, right?" Paimon, who had been hovering nearby, let out a relieved sigh. "Phew, that was way too close. You sure know how to make an entrance, Rimuru." Rimuru chuckled softly, still feeling the lingering rush from the battle. "I guess I do. But, you know, sometimes you just have to eat the problem and move on." The adepti, having witnessed the incredible power of Rimuru, exchanged looks of astonishment. Cloud Retainer was the first to break the silence. "One did not expect such a solution," she said, her voice filled with awe and uncertainty. "But it seems your methods are as unconventional as they are effective." Mountain Shaper nodded slowly, still processing the event. "Indeed, no one has ever thought to deal with a god in such a manner." Rimuru simply grinned, his demeanor relaxed. "Sometimes, you just need to think outside the box. Or in this case, think outside the ancient god." The tense atmosphere that had enveloped the battlefield started to lift as the last remnants of Ojal's presence faded away. The Jade Chamber, once in danger of being destroyed, was safe. The citizens of Liu began to realize the battle had ended, and their relief was palpable. With the ancient god defeated and the city secure, Rimuru's allies the adepti, Ether, Paimon, and others could finally let out the breaths they had been holding, knowing the battle was over, and they had triumphed. As everyone gathered back on the Jade Chamber, the platform Ningguang had summoned to support their fight dissolved into the air, leaving the adepti, Ningguang, Keqing, Ether, and Rimuru with a moment to catch their breath. Xiao's gaze immediately fixed on Rimuru, his usual stoic expression marked with a hint of concern. "Is Ojal truly dead?" Xiao asked, his tone sharp and focused. Rimuru gave a slight shake of his head, a calm smile crossing his lips. "Not exactly," he replied. The group exchanged surprised glances. Moon Carver was the first to voice his thoughts. "What do you mean he is still alive?" he asked, his tone blending confusion with concern. Rimuru chuckled, understanding the misunderstanding. "Just because I ate him doesn't mean he's dead. Inside me, there's a kind of pocket dimension, a personal space where I can store whatever I want to keep." He gestured vaguely, attempting to illustrate the odd nature of his ability. "It was sealed for a while when I came to this world, but I've been working on it to unlock pieces of it gradually. So Ojal is contained within this space. He's still alive, but he's not going anywhere." Ganyu blinked in astonishment, her expression somewhere between awe and disbelief. "So you're saying you have a whole dimension inside you?" Rimuru nodded, smiling as he shrugged. "Yeah, it's a little smaller than it used to be, still big enough to hold an ancient sea god, though," he joked. Keqing raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly did you pull that off?" she asked, clearly intrigued but also slightly wary. "You just devoured him." "Well, yes and no," Rimuru replied. "It's more like absorbing than devouring. Ojal's power is contained, but he's not actively trying to fight his way out, at least, not yet." Ether looked thoughtful for a moment, his brows furrowing slightly. "But, will it affect you in any way?" he asked, genuinely concerned for his friend's well-being. Rimuru shook his head confidently. "No, you don't have to worry about that. I have absolute control over the space inside of me. Nothing comes in or goes out unless I want it to. The ability is designed that way." Paimon drifted closer, her curiosity impossible to contain. "So what do you plan to do with Ojal now that you have him trapped?" she asked, tilting her head. Rimuru rubbed the back of his neck, looking a little uncertain. "Honestly, I haven't figured that part out yet. I guess he'll just stay there until I come up with a solution." It's not every day you have a massive, immortal sea god in storage. Mountain Shaper crossed his arms, casting a wary glance at Rimuru. Let's just hope he doesn't manage to break free again, he said, a note of caution in his voice. Rimuru nodded, meeting Mountain Shaper's gaze with a confident expression. Believe me, he won't. As long as he's in there, he's not getting out without my permission. With the threat seemingly subdued for now, Ether turned toward the adeptee, curiosity in his eyes. What will you do now? He asked, respectfully addressing the ancient guardians. Moon Carver looked at his fellow adeptee before answering. We will continue to seek out Rex Lapis and understand why he chose to leave. Our search is far from over. His voice carried a sense of deep purpose, the weight of his words underscoring their dedication. But rest assured, we will continue to watch over Liu from afar, protecting it as we always have. Cloud Retainer nodded in agreement, her gaze filled with a solemn pride. Yes, though Rex Lapis has departed, Liu is still our charge. We will remain its silent guardians. Ether, Ketching, and Ningguang exchanged glances, comforted by the steadfast commitment of the adeptee. Rimuru gave a nod of understanding, his respect for the adeptee growing even further. As the victorious cheers and laughter filled the air atop the Jade Chamber, everyone basked in the relief and joy of having defeated the ancient god Ojal. Rimuru stood among his allies, exchanging smiles and words of gratitude with the adeptee, Ether, Ganyu, and the others. For a brief moment, the weight of the battle lifted, and they allowed themselves a breath of peace. But far below, in the rocky and fog-filled landscape of the Gaian stone forest, a darker scene was unfolding. A small group of Fatui soldiers stood silently, surrounding four imposing figures harbingers of the Fatui, each exuding an aura of deadly intent. Senora's gaze was steely, her cold smirk revealing the satisfaction of a long-laid plan coming to fruition. Beside her stood Chilled, his eyes gleaming with restless anticipation, and next to him, Dottore, his grin wide and twisted with a strange excitement. And then there was Feldway, who stood calmly, watching the distant Jade Chamber through narrowed, calculating eyes. Feldway turned to Dottore. What do you make of him? He asked, his tone revealing both intrigue and malice. Dottore's expression became even more deranged, his fingers flexing around the spear-like weapon he held. He's more remarkable than anticipated, he replied, his voice laced with sinister delight. But that only makes this more interesting. Let's start our main plan. The other harbingers nodded in agreement. Without hesitation, Dottore raised his weapon, aiming it directly at Rimuru, who remained unaware atop the Jade Chamber. With a wicked smile, he activated the weapon, sending it streaking through the air toward its unsuspecting target. Back on the Jade Chamber, Rimuru continued to talk and laugh, the camaraderie of the moment bringing a rare, genuine smile to his face. But before anyone realized what was happening, a sudden, sharp whistle cut through the air. The next instant, Rimuru felt a piercing pain in his chest. A spear-like object had struck him with incredible force, embedding itself into his body. He froze, his eyes wide with shock as he looked down at the weapon now lodged in him. Gasps and shouts erupted around him. Paimon's hands flew to her mouth, eyes wide in horror, while Ganyu looked on in stunned disbelief, her expression turning pale with fear. The adeptee and Ether stood frozen, their shock and worry unmistakable. Before anyone could react, the spear seemed to transform. Metallic claws unfolded from the tip, tightening around Rimuru's form with a brutal grip. Then, without warning, the weapon activated, pulling him off the Jade Chamber with terrifying speed. Rimuru! Ether shouted, lunging forward, but he was already too late. The weapon dragged Rimuru downward in an unstoppable descent, pulling him toward the desolate expanse of the Gaian stone forest below. Everyone watched in horror as Rimuru's form grew smaller, vanishing rapidly from sight as he was dragged far from the safety of the Jade Chamber. The air was thick with the shock of what had just happened, the joyful celebration now obliterated by a heavy, chilling silence. The realization dawned on them all. Rimuru was gone, taken by an unknown force, and the struggle they thought they had won was only the beginning of a much darker battle. As Ether stood on the edge of the Jade Chamber, watching helplessly as Rimuru was pulled away, the adeptee didn't waste a second. Moon Carver swooped toward Ether and Paimon, urging them to get on his back, and without hesitation, they climbed aboard. Around them, the other adeptee Cloud Retainer, Mountain Shaper and Shao mobilized, their faces etched with determination as they prepared to confront whatever danger lay ahead. With a surge of power, they took off, racing across the skies toward the Gaian stone forest with Ether and Paimon in tow, the landscape below rushing past in a blur. High above, Ningguang, her gaze fixed intently on the direction where Rimuru had disappeared, issued a swift order to the Millelith soldiers. Take the Jade Chamber closer to the Gaian stone forest immediately. The soldiers, fully understanding the urgency in her voice, bowed deeply and rushed to carry out her command. Slowly but steadily, the massive structure of the Jade Chamber began to glide through the sky, moving toward the coast with Ganyu, Keqing, and Madame Ping standing beside Ningguang. Each wore an expression of steely resolve, knowing that the battle ahead could determine the future safety of Liu. Down at the shore of the Gaian stone forest, Rimuru was still locked in a fierce struggle against the weapon's grip. The metallic claws dug into him with relentless force, and, to his shock, he felt his energy being drained at an alarming rate. Realizing that this was no ordinary weapon but one crafted to sap his very strength, Rimuru acted quickly. He summoned 4 of his clones, each one focusing their power on dismantling the device bit by bit. With precision and force, the clones chipped away at the weapon, prying its grasp open as Rimuru directed them, his mind racing to counter its relentless hold. Finally, with a final surge of effort, the device shattered, its broken pieces falling to the rocky ground around him. Rimuru, weakened but now free, caught his breath as he looked up as his clone disappeared due to lack of energy. The mist and rocks parted just enough to reveal a line of figures approaching Fatui soldiers moving in precise formations, their steps heavy with purpose. And in front of them, 4 figures stood out against the backdrop, their dark, imposing silhouettes unmistakable. The Harbingers, Senora, Chilled, Dottore, and, to Rimuru's alarm, Feldway himself. The realization struck him hard. While he'd known Feldway might be lurking in Teyvat, facing him here and now, with little preparation, was a grim surprise. Rimuru clenched his fist, his mind racing faster as he examined his opponents. Each harbinger held a weapon at the ready, their eyes cold and calculating, and Feldway's gaze was locked directly on him, his expression one of malevolent curiosity. Rimuru could see Feldway's lips curl into a sinister smile, a silent acknowledgement of their recognition. This is bad, Rimuru thought, his mind racing as his chest wound began to regenerate, the torn slime structure knitting back together. He could feel the familiar energy returning, but he knew he was far from full strength. Without hesitation, Rimuru drew his katana, the blade gleaming under the dim light. Its weight felt reassuring in his grip, a promise of power, of protection, but this time, he knew the challenge before him would be unlike any he'd faced. The line of soldiers parted slightly, and the harbingers began their approach, closing in with a purpose that sent a wave of tension through the air. From high above, the distant sounds of the Jade Chamber moving closer could be heard, and the Adepti were advancing swiftly, their own powers surging as they neared. But for now, Rimuru knew that he was standing alone, face to face with the might of the Fatui's elite forces. He braced himself, his stance firm, knowing that he would have to hold his ground until reinforcements arrived. As Chilled unleashed a relentless wave of arrows, Rimuru's sword moved like a blur, expertly deflecting each projectile with swift, precise strokes. However, amidst his focus, a sudden presence appeared behind him. Reacting instinctively, Rimuru leapt into the air, barely evading a fierce attack that narrowly missed him. It was Dottore, grinning with a dark, calculated intensity. How did he reach me so quickly? Rimuru wondered, but he had no time to ponder as a powerful blow collided with his face, sending him hurtling backward toward a towering stone pillar with an impact that shook the ground. Struggling to steady himself after the unexpected hit, Rimuru looked up to find Feldway approaching, his gaze cold and commanding. "We don't have time to waste," Feldway announced sharply. "Capture him, immediately." In response, Senora dashed forward, clutching a golden artifact that Rimuru instantly recognized. The artifact radiated an intense energy as it activated, emitting a powerful, consuming force aimed directly at him. Memories of the night when he had been ambushed in Mondstadt flashed through his mind, recalling how similar artifacts were used in an attempt to trap and seal him. But this one felt different, stronger, more relentless. Summoning his strength, Rimuru flared his wings and bolted, just barely escaping the artifact's range. He muttered under his breath, "Persistent, aren't they?" Yet before he could catch his breath, he noticed Chilled preparing another attack, his arrows aimed with chilling precision. Sensing the tension in Chilled's voice, Rimuru couldn't help but challenge him. I thought you were the type who didn't need to rely on overwhelming numbers. Chilled's gaze wavered only briefly before he replied, his voice steady yet conflicted. This is the Tsarits's will, and I'm bound to fulfill it even if it goes against my principles. As Rimuru processed Chilled's words, a sharp shift in the air alerted him to another danger. Feldway had appeared again, his blade flashing as it collided with Rimuru's katana. The sheer force behind Feldway's strike was overwhelming, sending Rimuru flying in the opposite direction. But there was no respite. Dottore awaited him at the end of his path, still wielding the artifact, its pull more potent than ever, drawing Rimuru in with terrifying force. Rimuru struggled against the pull, flapping his wings in a desperate attempt to resist, but Feldway, anticipating this, moved into position and struck him hard from behind, sending him hurtling directly into the artifact's range. The pull intensified, feeling nearly impossible to escape. Just as the artifact's grip became inescapable, Seal intervened, sensing the urgent danger. Acting swiftly, she took control of Rimuru's body and instantly created a clone with the last bit of energy left some distance away. In a calculated maneuver, she transferred Rimuru's consciousness into the clone, leaving the clone's body trapped within the artifact's range as a decoy. Now, safe in the new clone's body, Rimuru watched from a distance, catching his breath as the Harbingers continued their relentless pursuit of the decoy, unaware of the switch. Observing the Harbingers' fierce attacks on what they believed was the real Rimuru, he saw an opportunity to counterattack. With a quiet murmur, he spoke to Seal, "You saved us in the nick of time." The Harbingers' triumph was short-lived. Feldway flew toward the real Rimuru, already sensing the trick. "The one you caught. Merely a clone," he sneered, his gaze narrowing. "The real one is right here." Dottore looked toward Rimuru, a wicked grin crossing his face. "Quite the little trick you've got, haven't you?" Rimuru barely had time to react before sensing an unexpected presence behind him. He turned sharply and found himself face to face with another Dottore. Shock flashed across his face, and as he scrambled for an explanation, Ciel's voice echoed in his mind, "It might be a clone, similar to your own." Rimuru gave a quick nod in acknowledgement, bracing himself as the clone launched a sudden attack. Dottore's blade whirled toward him, but Rimuru blocked it just in time, only to duck immediately to dodge a horizontal slash from Feldway that cut close. Dottore's clone was relentless, landing a brutal kick that sent Rimuru skidding across the sandy shore of Gaian stone forest. Rimuru tried to stand, grimacing from the relentless pace of the attacks. But before he could recover, a familiar sound reached him, a voice calling his name. Looking up, Rimuru saw Ether, Paimon, and the Adepti rushing toward him, almost at the shore. Relief and surprise mixed on his face. However, the Harbingers spotted the distraction and seized their chance. Rimuru's momentary lapse of focus was all they needed. Dottore darted forward, closing the distance with ruthless speed, activating the artifact in his hand. A powerful, swirling force began pulling Rimuru toward it. Rimuru struggled, summoning every bit of his strength to resist, but the artifact's pull was unrelenting, as if it had a life of its own. He fought desperately, his wings beating, his energy flaring, yet the force was too strong. Ether, Paimon, and the Adepti landed on the shore just in time to witness the final moments as Rimuru was sucked into the artifact. Shock and horror flashed across their faces, frozen as they watched Rimuru disappear. "No! Rimuru!" Ether shouted, unsheathing his sword as he charged toward Dottore. His voice trembled with rage as he yelled, "Give me that artifact. Now!" Dottore's face twisted into a mocking grin as he raised his weapon to meet Ether's strike. Just before their blades could collide, Shao appeared between them, blocking Dottore's weapon with his polearm, his eyes blazing with fury. Shao glanced back at Ether and spoke with cold determination. "Stay focused. We'll free him." His words were steady, but the tension in his voice was unmistakable. Feldway smirked as he observed the chaos unfolding, signaling to his companions. "Our work here is complete. Let's withdraw." With a quick nod, the Harbingers prepared to leave, and Feldway conjured several shimmering portals behind them. A mass of Fatui soldiers poured from these portals, creating a nearly impenetrable wall of bodies between the Harbingers and their pursuers, stalling for time. The Adepti moved through the ranks of Fatui soldiers with lightning speed and lethal precision. Their powers surged as they cut down the advancing soldiers effortlessly, but the sheer volume of Fatui forces made it challenging to reach the Harbingers. Ether, standing alongside Xiao and Moon Carver, fought fiercely to carve a path, determined to catch up before the Harbingers could escape. However, the relentless waves of soldiers slowed them down, and the Harbingers were steadily moving closer to the portals. Suddenly, a thunderous boom echoed across the battlefield, capturing everyone's attention. From the open sea, a massive cannonball soared through the air, landing with a colossal explosion just before the Harbingers could reach the portals. The shockwave forced them to leap back, momentarily stunned. As the smoke cleared, the Harbingers looked to see the imposing figure of the Crux fleet lined up in a battle-ready formation offshore. At the helm, Beidou stood confidently, her eyes blazing with determination. With a commanding voice, she signaled to her crew, "Fire! Don't let them escape." A powerful barrage of cannonballs erupted from the Crux ships, each one slicing through the sky and crashing down perilously close to the Harbingers. Explosions erupted along the shore as the Fatui soldiers scattered in a panic, trying to avoid the relentless bombardment. The Harbingers, caught off guard, scrambled to dodge the powerful blasts, which tore through the ground around them, making the shoreline a chaotic, smoke-filled battleground. Separated by the blasts, the Harbingers were forced to split up. Senora barely dodged as a cannonball exploded near her, sending shards of stone and earth into the air. She scowled in frustration, her icy gaze fixed on the Crux fleet. Chilled rolled to the side to avoid another blast, his expression shifting between surprise and grudging admiration for the well-timed assault. Feldway and Dottore, meanwhile, managed to keep their balance amidst the chaos, though even they looked momentarily thrown off by the unexpected attack. Dottore, grinning maniacally, lifted a strange device, emitting a dark, swirling energy in an attempt to counter the cannon fire. He sent blasts of destructive energy toward the Crux fleet, each one colliding with incoming cannonballs, resulting in a series of mid-air explosions. But the Crux fleet's firepower was relentless, each volley driving the Harbingers back and keeping them from reaching their portals. Beidou's voice rang out above the deafening roar of the cannons. "Keep firing. Show these Harbingers the true power of the Crux." The Adepti, reinvigorated by the support from Beidou's fleet, advanced with renewed ferocity. Xiao leapt forward, his spear a blur of deadly precision as he struck down Fatui soldiers with ease. Moon Carver and Mountain Shaper moved in tandem, their elemental abilities tearing through the Fatui ranks and clearing a path towards the Harbingers. Ganyu and Keqing, still on the Jade Chamber, watched intently, preparing to join the fray as soon as an opportunity presented itself. Seeing the Harbingers in disarray, Ether and the Adepti seized their chance. Together, they pushed forward, tearing through the remaining soldiers as they closed the distance to the now cornered Harbingers. The battlefield was a chaotic blend of explosions, flashes of elemental energy, and the powerful blasts from the Crux fleet's cannons lighting up the shoreline. Trapped between the oncoming onslaught from the Adepti and Ether, and the unrelenting cannon fire from the Crux fleet, the Harbingers could feel their escape slipping away. Senora clenched her fists, her icy aura intensifying as she glanced towards Feldway. "We need another plan," she hissed. As the explosions settled, the Harbingers exchanged brief glances, eyeing their surroundings. With the tide of battle seemingly in their favor, they prepared to escape, hoping to use the chaos to slip away unnoticed. But their strategy was disrupted as a resounding march echoed from the cliffs of Gaian Stone Forest. The Millilith soldiers had arrived, their numbers stretching far, ready to reinforce the defenders. The Fatui soldiers were immediately engaged in fierce skirmishes with Liu's finest, their escape route now compromised. Ether, standing on the battlefield amidst the frenzy, spotted Chilled and steeled himself. "I'll take you down," he declared, charging forward, sword ready. Chilled met his gaze with a cocky grin, summoning his dual hydro blades as he stepped forward, his stance ready for combat. "I've been waiting for this, traveler." Chilled's voice held both excitement and malice as he lunged toward Ether, and their weapons clashed, sending a surge of elemental energy rippling through the air. Above, the Jade Chamber hovered ominously, gliding over the battlefield as Ganyu and Keqing stood at its edge, surveying the scene below. As it approached the shore, they both leapt down from the platform, landing gracefully and immediately joining the fray. Keqing took command of the Millilith with an authoritative call, her voice ringing clear. "Millilith, form ranks. Don't let the Fatui advance another step. She wielded her thunder stiletto with precision, unleashing bolts of electro-energy that crackled through the ranks of Fatui soldiers. The Millilith followed her lead, creating a fortified barrier to prevent any Fatui soldiers from advancing further inland. Ganyu moved through the battlefield with calm determination, her frost flake bow glimmering in her hands. Spotting Signora, she narrowed her gaze and strode forward, her icy aura flaring as she prepared herself for a showdown. Signora turned, noticing her approach, and a smirk crept across her face. "So, the Adeptus secretary thinks she's my equal," she sneered, flames igniting around her. "Your power is but a flicker compared to the Tsaritsa's might." Ganyu, unfazed by the taunt, raised her bow with poise. "You're in Liu now. I'll protect my home from your flames," she replied resolutely, loosing an arrow as shards of ice danced around her. Meanwhile, on another part of the battlefield, Xiao and Moon Carver stood side by side, their gazes fixed on Dottore, who held a menacing grin as he observed them. Dottore twirled a sinister-looking device in his hand, its lights flashing with a strange energy. "Ah, I do love field experiments," he chuckled, his eyes gleaming with twisted excitement. "Let's see how much an Adeptus can withstand." Xiao's expression was one of steely focus, his spear raised. "Your vile practices end here," he spat, charging forward with swift, precise strikes. Moon Carver followed suit, his adeptal energy flaring as he moved alongside Xiao, together unleashing powerful strikes that forced Dottore to dodge and parry. Not far from them, Mountain Shaper and Cloud Retainer faced Feldway, who stood unfazed amidst the chaos. Feldway observed them with a dark, calculating look. "It's curious," he mused, "to see such loyalty to a land that clings to the past and someone whom you just met." His voice dripped with disdain. Cloud Retainer's gaze hardened, and with a sweep of her wings, she sent a gust of wind at him. "You are a threat to Liu's peace, and we shall not stand idle," she declared. Mountain Shaper raised his staff, summoning a torrent of stone to reinforce their attack. Feldway merely smirked, his own aura radiating dark power as he deflected their attacks with swift, precise movements. With the Harbingers each locked in fierce combat, the Millilith soldiers pressed forward, preventing any Fatui soldiers from reaching the Harbingers. Beto's fleet maintained its position at sea, sending wave after wave of cannon fire onto the shore. The explosions rocked the battlefield, creating even more confusion among the Fatui, who struggled to keep their footing amidst the bombardment. Beto, standing at the helm, signaled for another volley, her eyes sharp as she watched the Harbingers scatter in a bid to evade the attacks. Ketching, fighting alongside the Millilith, kept a watchful eye on Ganyu's battle with Signora. Though the Harbinger's flames were fierce, Ganyu's calm and steady aim allowed her to keep her distance while inflicting powerful frost damage. Their clash was intense, the fire and ice meeting in explosive bursts, each element striving to overpower the other. Chilled and Ether's battle was just as fierce, the two engaging in a deadly dance of blades and elemental energy. "This is the thrill I live for, traveler," Chilled shouted, a manic grin on his face as he unleashed a powerful hydro slash. Ether countered with a burst of anemo energy, swirling the water around him and pushing Chilled back momentarily. In the heart of the conflict, Xiao and Moon Carver advanced on Dottore, determined to put an end to his twisted schemes. Dottore activated another one of his devices, sending out waves of chaotic energy that pulsed through the air. Xiao leapt into the fray, dodging the attacks with his adeptal agility while Moon Carver provided support, summoning barriers of stone to block Dottore's blasts. Back with Feldway, Mountain Shaper and Cloud Retainer pressed their advantage, striking with unyielding force. Feldway, however, seemed to anticipate their every move, countering with bursts of dark energy that kept the two Adepti at bay. "You cannot stop what's already begun," he taunted, his voice cold and unwavering. But Cloud Retainer and Mountain Shaper refused to back down, their combined power challenging even Feldway's strength. As the intense battle continued, Ether and Chilled's clash reached a fever pitch. Paimon hovered anxiously nearby, cheering, "You've got this, Ether. Show him what you're made of." Her voice seemed to stoke Ether's determination, and each of his strikes grew faster and fiercer. Chilled grinned, but his eyes flashed with caution as he noticed the raw fury behind Ether's attacks. "Looks like you're pretty angry, aren't you, traveler?" Chilled taunted, hoping to shake Ether's focus. "Shut up," Ether snapped, leaping forward with a fierce, downward strike that glowed with elemental power. Chilled barely managed to cross his hydro blades in time, the impact of Ether's sword nearly breaking through his defense and pushing him back several feet. For a moment, Chilled felt his grip slipping, a tinge of surprise breaking through his usual confidence. Seeing that he could no longer afford to hold back, Chilled's expression turned serious. He called upon the dark energy of the abyss, allowing it to envelop him in an armor of swirling, ominous power. The dark energy pulsed around him, covering him in a menacing abyssal guise. With a fierce cry, he launched himself toward Ether, faster and stronger than before. Their weapons collided with explosive force, creating a massive shockwave that rippled across the battlefield, kicking up dust and sending debris flying in all directions. Meanwhile, on another side of the battlefield, Ganyu squared off against Senora. Flames crackled and flickered from Senora's whip as she lashed it forward, each strike a sizzling, deadly arc. Ganyu dodged with graceful precision, her every movement flowing with the practiced calm of a trained adeptus. Her fingers moved swiftly, drawing her bow with steady hands, and icy energy gathered at her fingertips, forming into an arrow of pure frost. Taking careful aim, Ganyu released the arrow, sending it hurtling toward Senora. Senora managed to sidestep the first shot, but Ganyu's assault was relentless. One arrow after another flew through the air with blistering speed, each strike finding its mark closer and closer to Senora. The battlefield filled with the sound of arrows whizzing through the air as Ganyu focused, maintaining her relentless barrage. Senora's whip cracked as she deflected some of the arrows, the fiery energy clashing with Ganyu's ice, sending sparks and shards of frost in all directions. She dodged others with quick sidesteps, twisting to avoid the rapid strikes. But despite her best efforts, several arrows managed to find their mark, piercing her armor and sending chilling waves through her. As she felt the icy burn spread across her skin, Senora's eyes narrowed with rage. "You'll pay for that, Adeptus," she hissed, her voice venomous. She raised her hands, summoning spears of ice that hovered in the air around her, each one radiating with dangerous intent. With a flick of her wrist, she sent the spears hurtling toward Ganyu in a deadly rain of icy projectiles. Ganyu's eyes narrowed, her focus razor-sharp. She moved with practiced grace, dodging and weaving through the storm of ice spears with agility, her every motion precise. The deadly spears shot past her, each one narrowly missing or grazing her, leaving faint cuts and icy burns where they passed. Despite the danger, Ganyu remained calm, each movement controlled as she looked for an opening to counterattack. The sounds of battle rang through Gaian stone forest, as explosions echoed from where Beto's Crux fleet fired cannonballs to support the ground forces, preventing the Harbinger's escape. Amid the chaos, Ketching led the Millilith with fierce resolve, directing soldiers to hold the line and contain the Fatui soldiers that continued to pour from their portals. Her every command was executed swiftly, Millilith forces forming a stalwart barrier, pressing forward to defend Liu. Above, the Jade Chamber hovered, with Ningguang observing the battlefield from its deck, her gaze keen and calculating. She directed the forces with a calm authority, prepared to unleash more of the Jade Chamber's defenses if needed. Beside her, Madame Ping stood, her wise eyes assessing the chaotic battlefield, and when Ketching's forces began to press Fatui soldiers back, Madame Ping stepped forward, raising her hands to cast protective barriers around the Millilith soldiers below, giving them further cover as they fought. As Xiao and Moon Carver faced off against Dottore, a smug grin played across Dottore's lips. "Do you really think that just the two of you are enough to defeat me?" His words dripped with taunting amusement as he observed the Adepti warriors before him, his eyes gleaming with a dark excitement. Xiao's grip on his spear tightened, his golden eyes narrowed in focused intensity. Moon Carver, standing beside him, had assumed his human form, his gaze steady and unyielding as a massive claymore materialized in his hand, glowing with adeptal energy. "We'll see about that," he replied calmly, his voice full of resolve. Dottore's smirk only deepened. "Ah, what a day," he chuckled. "To see Adepti in their true strength. I'll make sure this opportunity isn't wasted." He raised his sword with a flourish, his posture confident and relaxed, as if he were savoring the challenge before him. Without another word, Xiao and Moon Carver launched themselves at Dottore. Xiao was the first to strike, his spear slicing through the air in a swift horizontal arc aimed at Dottore's side. But Dottore leapt high, narrowly evading the attack, his body twisting midair to face Moon Carver's incoming claymore. The Adeptus brought his weapon down with a powerful vertical slash, but Dottore quickly raised his sword, deflecting the blow with a clash that echoed across the battlefield. The sheer force of the impact sent Dottore hurtling back down to the ground, where he landed with a heavy thud, cracking the stone beneath his feet. Xiao didn't waste a moment and darted forward, spear flashing as he launched into a series of fierce strikes, each blow faster and more relentless than the last. Dottore deflected and dodged with an unsettling ease, his smirk unwavering as if he were toying with the Adeptus. He seemed almost entertained, dodging each of Xiao's attacks with a calculated grace. Then, taking advantage of Dottore's focus on Xiao, Moon Carver raised his hand, summoning a ring of ethereal swords that hovered around him, each blade radiating with adeptal energy. With a sharp gesture, he sent the swords flying toward Dottore, their sharp edges gleaming as they closed in from every angle. In a blur, Xiao moved into position behind Dottore, trapping him in a deadly crossfire. But just as they thought they had him cornered, another figure emerged from the shadows. A second Dottore stepped forward, identical in appearance to the first, his expression a mirror of cold amusement. This clone raised a hand, conjuring an elemental shield that flared to life, intercepting the barrage of Moon Carver's swords. Each ethereal blade shattered against the barrier in a burst of light, leaving the second Dottore unharmed. The real Dottore barely seemed fazed as he continued clashing with Xiao, their weapons striking in rapid succession. The air was filled with sparks as their blades met, each clash resonating with a metallic ring that echoed across the battlefield. Xiao's eyes narrowed in surprise, but he quickly steadied himself, blocking and countering Dottore's strikes with unwavering focus. Despite his best efforts, however, Dottore was a relentless opponent, each movement precise and controlled as he met Xiao's attacks head-on. Moon Carver, meanwhile, grit his teeth as he faced off against the clone, realizing that this duplicate was nearly as powerful as the original. With a swift motion, he raised his claymore and charged, clashing against the clone's barrier with a resounding impact that sent shockwaves rippling through the sand beneath their feet. The clone retaliated immediately, countering with a series of swift strikes that Moon Carver met with equal fervor. As the battle raged on, Dottore's sinister laughter echoed across the battlefield. "What's the matter, Adepti?" he sneered, blocking another of Xiao's strikes with a fluid motion. "Are you feeling outnumbered?" Xiao and Moon Carver exchanged a quick glance, a silent understanding passing between them. They both knew that facing two versions of Dottore would require every ounce of their strength and skill. Moon Carver and Xiao exchanged a silent, determined glance. The gravity of their situation was clear, they needed to use everything in their arsenal to stand a chance against Dottore. Xiao nodded and lifted his hand in front of his face, invoking his adeptal mask. The dark mask materialized, covering his face and amplifying his already potent power, his aura surging with ferocity. Moon Carver readied himself beside Xiao, adeptal energy gathering around him in waves as he prepared to unleash his full strength. Dottore's eyes glittered with excitement as he observed the rising power of his opponents. He grinned, unfazed, and took his stance. Xiao made the first move, launching himself forward with a speed almost too fast for the eye to follow. His spear sliced through the air, the force of his strike nearly breaking the sound barrier as he aimed for Dottore. But Dottore, with a fluid dodge, sidestepped at the last second, narrowly avoiding the strike. Xiao's spear grazed the ground, leaving a deep furrow in its wake. Meanwhile, Moon Carver turned his attention to the Dottore clone standing near a stone pillar. He dashed forward, closing the distance in an instant, his claymore raised high and glowing with adeptal energy. With a powerful swing, he brought his weapon down in a fierce horizontal arc aimed directly at the clone. The clone leapt sideward just in time, but the force of Moon Carver's attack was so immense that it cut cleanly through the stone pillar, splitting it in two with a deafening crack. The energy from the swing carried through, shattering a second pillar further behind. Dottore's gaze flickered with something akin to awe as he observed the display of strength. His eyes gleamed with an almost maniacal delight, and a crazed grin spread across his face. "Yes, this is the power of the Adepti. Show me more." Xiao landed beside Moon Carver, his spear at the ready. The two Adepti stood firm, their combined aura illuminating the battlefield. The ground trembled beneath them, and a wave of adeptal energy radiated outward, casting an ethereal glow over the landscape. Dottore and his clone watched with an eager anticipation, seemingly thrilled by the challenge before them. Without a word, Xiao lunged again, his masked form a blur as he aimed another powerful strike at the real Dottore. This time, Moon Carver moved in sync, coordinating his assault with Xiao's movements. Dottore was forced to block and evade in rapid succession, his crazed laughter filling the air as he danced around their attacks. Each strike was a testament to the power of the adepti. The ground shattered beneath their feet with each blow, debris flew through the air, and the very air itself seemed to crackle with the intensity of their battle. Despite Dottore's formidable skill and agility, the adepti were relentless, pressing forward with unmatched fury and precision. Dottore's clone joined the fray, intercepting some of Moon Carver's attacks with a conjured elemental shield. Xiao seized the opportunity, maneuvering around the clone to aim a devastating thrust at Dottore's exposed flank. Dottore twisted away just in time, deflecting the spear with a calculated parry, his eyes still gleaming with that unhinged fascination. As they fought, Moon Carver channeled more adeptal energy into his claymore, each swing growing stronger, more focused. In a fluid motion, he unleashed a shockwave with his next strike, forcing the Dottore clone backward, creating a small window for Xiao to strike. Without hesitation, Xiao summoned his power and leapt, his spear crashing down with immense force onto Dottore's position, a wave of energy exploding outward upon impact. Dottore staggered back, momentarily thrown off balance. His grin widened as he steadied himself, his gaze flickering between the two adepti with an insatiable thrill. Magnificent. Xiao and Moon Carver barely paused, their focus unwavering. They knew that this battle was far from over, and that defeating Dottore would take everything they had. And so, with a fierce resolve, they continued their relentless assault, their movements in perfect harmony, their power reaching new heights as they fought for the safety of Liu and the honor of the adepti. To be continued.